Hi everyone, I'm Ryan Miles from On Tilt Gaming, and today I want to talk a bit about the deck building process that went into making the Skyscraper Pricia deck that just topped GP Montreal, with Aaron Miles finally coming out as the champion. So first up, we're going to take a look back at the Pricia World deck list that I had played at the Atlantic City ARG. This should be pretty familiar to you by now. If you haven't seen it before, I have an entire video on it on the On Tilt Gaming channel, and you can see some of my thoughts about that. But after the event, there were some cards that I definitely felt weren't performing up to par. So we made some cuts overall, and this is like the shell of the Pricia World deck that I felt the deck needed to function. You still have your 4 Sacred Elf and your 4 Levitine, but like you go down to 2 Death Scythe because the card is pretty much irrelevant in a lot of things that aren't the mirror. Down to 3 Divine Bird of Ataraxia, down to 3 Drag, down to 1 Heavenly Gust, just like a cut on like the top end of like 4 ofs and things like that. Just cards that you didn't really need to see too many multiples of. So this is like what the overall shell is, and I had 5 card slots basically in my mind that I was looking for to add text into. And one of the things that we really wanted to look at initially with the Pricia World shell was the Jack and the Beanstalk. So we ended up adding 2 Mariabella, 2 Jack and the Beanstalk, and 1 Skyscraper Giant. Mariabella personally was just one of my favorite cards from the World variant. I sided it in against Control, and it just felt very impactful overall. If you guys have seen Dylan Thompson's top 16 Landfall Pricia variant, he plays Goose Ballesta, the green-black 3-drop that shuffles, or you like banish your stones and then you get more stones. So he played that along with 4 Mariabella to really abuse Mariabella getting resonance triggers. And overall, I just thought the card was very strong. So also in this list you have the 2 Jack and the 1 Skyscraper, and that was just kind of to see how the card performed. Obviously, when you read Jack and the Beanstalk and you think, hey, what if I gave this card swiftness and flying, you can kind of see the applications of how powerful that could be. But we didn't really have an idea of how like overwhelming it could be if you really committed to that strategy. So we kind of threw it in there just as a gimmick. And again, it's just sort of looking at like mid-range opportunities. We felt that like this kind of list where you have the world package overall, like the Tamas, the Adambralias, the Drags, that's very powerful in and of itself. But what that deck ended up doing a lot of the time was ended up playing like a mid-range deck where people would put down a Death Scythe against you, or people would put down a Barrier of Shadows against you, and suddenly instead of just relying on Pricia, you had to really rely on your Resonators to carry the game. So with the Mariabellas and the Jack, the potential of Jack just coming out of nowhere and pulling in a Skyscraper Giant, and the Dregs just being powerful, and the Adambralias, this was like supposed to function more as a slower deck with a bigger focus on Resonators just overwhelming your opponent. But it wasn't very consistent. You had a lot of cloggy hands because of the Mariabellas and the Jacks. So it wasn't something that we really put too much thought into. And again, this was around the time of the Atlantic City ARG we were testing this, and it just didn't feel very strong overall. But around the same time, we were looking at this Sylph combo Pricia list. This was designed by Jimmy Osborne of On Tilt Gaming. And for those of you who don't know, you may have seen Sylph in the green avatar deck lists. Basically what happens is when a Wind Magic Stone enters your field, you can recover Sylph. In the green avatar variant, that means that you're giving the resonance trigger from the green avatar onto Sylph, turning him into a mana dork so he can tap for any mana, and then doing that multiple times. But in this deck, he's just going to attack your opponent in the face multiple times. You can buff him up with a Rapid Growth or a Blessing of Athena, and then just repeatedly hit your opponent in the face for 10 damage or 15 damage or 20 damage as he gets bigger and bigger with Blessing of Athena. And this deck also played the Mariabella. It played Pricia Persuna Flame. It was basically an aggro deck, but instead of using like Lancelot to be your 2-drop, it focused on Sylph, which has more potential damage in the long run and isn't as weak to things like Down the Drain. But the real thing that stood out to me about this deck and playing against it was just how powerful the Fiery Fox of Reincarnation was. You can see it at the top line next to the Sacred Elf. Fiery Fox of Reincarnation functions almost like a Melfi. It's a 2-drop mana dork, basically. It produces a mana because you can banish a tapped Magic Stone, and then you call an untapped Magic Stone, and you can immediately tap that right away to float, to use Will for whatever it is that you need. So having tested against this a lot, it felt like I was playing against a traditional aggro Pricia. But it wasn't even the Sylph that was like so overwhelming. It was the Fiery Fox of Reincarnation in combination with the Mariabella. So when I revisited the World deck list again, I went to Instead of playing the Jack anymore, I had played 2 Fiery Fox of Reincarnation, 2 Maribella, and I just went back to the second Heavenly Gust for my 5th tech slot. And this felt a lot more consistent. Honestly, I think Thursday before the event, this was the deck that I was planning on playing at Montreal. And it was because strictly of how powerful the Fiery Fox of Reincarnation and Maribella interactions are when your opponent is able to slow you down and play cards like Death Scythe or Barrier of Shadows. Just in those kind of situations, you really need to, you end up calling like to 3 or 4 stones, and that's where Maribella really can start taking over a game against the control decks or the mid-range decks. So this was what I had been testing, and I had been thinking about side decking the package of the Jack and the Beanstalk and the Skyscraper Giant, and I had been talking to Stephanie Shaw. I was like, hey, she was the one who originally invented the Pricia World deck, and I was like, hey, I tested out the Skyscraper version. I didn't really like that much, but I want to side, the package. I had been siding 2 2 Jack and the Beanstalk, 1 Skyscraper Giant, and she was like, oh, well, I've been playing 4 Jack and the Beanstalk and 2 Skyscraper Giant. And I'm like, that sounds absolutely insane. I was already having consistency issues, but I was driving on the way to Montreal, and I thought, hey, what if I just cut all of the world stuff? Just cut out the Tamas, cut out the Adam Brawleys, cut out the Divine Birds, cut out the Dregs. That frees up like 15 card slots basically. And that would give me more room for Maribella, which was the thing that I was most excited about. And just kind of give it the old college try. Just kind of see how the deck plays out. If you really just all in on the Jag package, that feels a lot better than just trying to haphazardly throw it into the world list. So that was something I just wanted to test, get out of the way, see what really happened with it. And this was the first iteration of that deck. It got to play 4 Fiery Fox of Reincarnation and 3 Maribella, so I was satisfied. We took Steph's recommendation, added in 4 Jack and the Beanstalk and 2 Skyscraper Giant. And then for the rest of the deck, we had the 4 Guinevere, the 4 Rook Egg. We knew that if we drew Skyscraper Giant, we wouldn't be able to pull it out of the deck with Jack, so that's why we went with the 2 Horn of the Sacred Beast main deck. We still had the 2 Heavenly Gusts to make sure we could clear away opposing Death Scythes and Barrier of Shadows. 3 Wall of Wind, because it just felt standard at the time. We'd been messing with 2, but 3 in this list kind of solidified our Jack plays a bit more. And then we had 2 Hydromonica, because you can just stack a Skyscraper Giant to the top with a Hydromonica and then just cheat it in with a Pricia flip. And we tested this for a couple hours, literally the day before the event. And the things that we found were that it became kind of difficult to have Jack hit your opponent when they were playing Feathsing. Gwyber has just kind of got in the way a lot of the time. Same thing with Fox. Griffins would just block him. And when you're playing 4 of this card in your deck, you really can't afford to have your primary strategy kind of fall to that kind of stuff. Another issue we had was the Fiery Fox of Reincarnation kept us banishing so many stones that we would run out of stones in our stone deck. Even though we had 2 horn, we just couldn't find the horns fast enough to stop us from running out of stones if we saw 2 or even 3 of the Fiery Fox. And against everything that wasn't the exact Pricia mirror, for example, against Gwyber, against Fox, against control decks, the Wall of Wind was really underperforming. So we needed to find another avenue to help us get our Jacks through, help us shuffle our stones in more if we wanted to go up to 3 horn, or if we wanted to cut down to 3 Fiery Fox. Those are the options we were looking at. And our final problem was that even if we were able to get out a Skyscraper Giant against a Feathsing deck, especially against Feathsing, they would usually kill it by using Earther, Keeper of the Past, or they would use Triton and then sacrifice it to Adam Brawley or Levitine. So even though Skyscraper Giant has this barrier chant, he was still very vulnerable in some matchups. So this was the final list that we ended up on, and some of the changes you can see hamper or fix these problems that we were seeing. The Wind Secluded Refuge stops our Skyscraper Giant from being targeted by Keeper of the Past or by Triton. We put in our own Keeper of the Past because we felt that the 0 matchup was something worth noting. We just wanted to have an out to it. We just had the extra slot because we wanted to cut one of the Hydromonicas because they were underperforming in testing. We went down to 3 Fiery Fox of Reincarnation, which I think is the correct number. And the Wall of Winds just turned into Gale Forces. And the Gale Force is really, really strong here because it makes sure that your Jack and the Beanstalk does not go hindered. He is completely unblockable pretty much if you give him flying. If your opponent tries to block with a flyer, you can just gale force their blocker, and then not only are you killing what is probably a Gwyber, but you're also triggering your Jack and you're getting out your Skyscraper Giant. So this is kind of how the list came about. Oh, and one last thing was the stones. If you look at the original Skyscraper list, we had one red and one green, and in the final list we ended up on double red stones. The reason for that is that in the mid game, in like the 4 or 5 stone area, this is again strictly only if your opponent is able to stop you from killing them outright with Pricia. You would find situations where you just draw into Jack and the Beanstalk, and you're like, cool. Now, like my opponent is completely not ready for this. We've been playing Forcible for 4 or 5 turns. They don't even know the Jack is coming. So you would play Jack and the Beanstalk. You would call a stone, and it would just be a mono green stone, and you would want to just jump off a bridge because it just felt so terrible hitting that mono green stone every time. And the other thing was that with Mariabella, 9 times out of 10. When we were calling a stone for our Mariabella search, when she has an enter ability that when she enters the field, you get to search your deck for a basic Magistone. Mostly we were going for the red stone, and it wasn't even because we valued the blast counter more than we valued the breeze counter. It was because we just wanted to give her swiftness. You know, like just playing a 10-10 for 4 with swiftness is really, really strong, and just like helps make your Pricia not need to have as many regalia to deal lethal. It makes Skyscraper Giants damage a lot more relevant. Like, you're still an aggro deck overall. So pushing in for 10 damage was just like super relevant. So when we cut the green stone for the red stone was when we started going second every game, so that we could always make sure we have a turn 1 energized Sacred Elf play, things like that. And just always having swiftness was super important. So that's how the deck ended up coming into being, and how we ended up on the final list. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you very much. I'll see you next time.